question 21. This is from the SAT 13, April 2018 international test. And let's jump in. Okay, so the question says the main purpose of the passage is to, so it's a big picture question, and we're looking for main purpose. And the way that we solve these are, honestly, the way that we have to solve this, we have to have one, sort of a general understanding of what the text is about, and two, we have to have a more specific understanding, or maybe we should say we can get a more specific understanding from looking at the title and then looking at the introduction to the passage. And both of these will tell us um, a little more clearly maybe what the purpose of the passage is. So let's start with this. This is a general outline of the passage because I don't want to put the whole passage on here. Obviously, this is not something that we're going to do when we're answering questions in real time. There's not enough time to write something like this or even think in this much detail. But you sort of want to note the same thing. So notice I have everything organized by paragraphs. And the point of that is because SAT passages are generally organized pretty well, and you can usually break them down by paragraph or sometimes paragraph chunks. So this is what we have here. We have the introduction of a new study, right? So we have this claim about an internet of plants, and then we have a new study that sort of shows that. We have the origin of the experiment, where the idea came from. We have the setup of the experiment or the methodology. We have the data collection process. We have the main finding of the study. We have another important finding, and then we have a final conclusion or assessment of it. This is pretty common. So this is a science passage. For the science passages on the SAT, they generally follow the structure. We start off with some sort of introduction or some sort of claim. Then oftentimes they'll talk about the origin or the idea behind the experiment. Maybe they were looking for one thing, but found something else. Then we have the setup, methodology, data collection, finding, conclusions, etc. Sometimes they'll also end with, it's very common to end with, there's more research that needs to be done, etc. But this is basically the passage outline that we have. And so let's keep going from here. So once we have that general idea, we know, okay, this is really mostly just about a single experiment meant to prove a certain point up here about the internet of plants. We can also go to the title here and the introductory paragraph. And obviously this is something we already done if we have this outline here. But I like to get a little more focused on the specifics. So this says beanstalk, which that's about as helpful as it is. So there's really nothing there, but let's look at the intro. The idea that plants have developed a subterranean internet sounds like science fiction, but, and this is very important, we know on the SAT, pay attention to these words because usually what follows them is something important to the passage. So it starts by this idea about a subterranean internet, right? Plants having their internet. And then it says, but David Johnson believes he has shown that just such an internet exists. So the introduction introduces this idea and then says there's a study that proves it. Passage outline also sort of supports this general idea that we start with a big idea and then we have an experiment that will prove it. So let's go through our answer choices for A. So A says, discuss a finding that addresses an ongoing problem. So this, we have a finding certainly, but this part here addresses an ongoing problem. This is what's going to make this answer choice wrong. Because there's no ongoing problem that's mentioned. And honestly, what we would expect to see an ongoing problem mentioned would be in the first paragraph, right? It would introduce by saying, there's this big problem about communication through plants, et cetera, and now we understand why. So if it's going to mention an ongoing problem, that's not going to be something that's hidden in the passage that you missed. It's going to be pretty blatant, pretty obvious usually in the intro. Because we don't see it, we can get rid of A. B says, describe an experiment. So far, so good. That's what we have. Whose results support a particular conclusion. Good. That would definitely match what we have. We have an experiment, and it's supporting a particular conclusion, basically that plants have developed a subterranean internet. Now, what's also good about this is how general it is. I always point this out. I'm having trouble figuring out exactly how to articulate how general answer choices are better or how to recognize them. But basically, describe an experiment. It's not making an opinionated claim. It's not saying evaluating the experiment, proving something. It's a very mellow claim. It's just describing it. That's hard to be incorrect. Then it says the results support a conclusion. That's almost tautological, which basically means it almost is always true. If you have an experiment, it's always going to support some conclusion, right? maybe not an interesting conclusion, maybe something that's not a positive conclusion, but it's always going to support something. So it's almost like, what is B even saying? It's almost saying nothing, and that makes it slippery. It makes it hard to prove it's wrong. So it's a good answer first. C says introduce a research methodology that revolutionizes the process. This is a strong claim here. We should already be skeptical of it. Again, the passage, this is wrong because the passage doesn't focus on the methodology. It certainly talks about the methodology and describes it, but it doesn't focus on the methodology as being especially interesting or revolutionizing something. Again, it is not something we would miss. It would be mentioned in the first paragraph or in the title or one of the major points in our outline. So we can get rid of C. And then D says outline a scientific study. So far, so good. That's true. That undermines, okay? So undermines again is one of those strong, specific, and this is a negative claim too, which doesn't mean it's wrong, but it means it carries a big burden of proof. Meaning if we're going to choose it, we need to make sure we have the evidence. And what it says is it undermines a popular theory. Again, that's something you would see here, some popular theory mentioned, and then a discussion of how it's being undermined. We don't see it. Get rid of D. That leaves us answer choice B for question 21.